The citadel of Koravax floated silently above the sulfur skies of Paraxis, its crystalline domes glinting with pale blue light as the Council of Ascendants convened for an emergency session. Beneath them, millions of alien minds hummed with collective disapproval. The matter at hand was deemed closed months ago, a curiosity not worth further discussion until the human returned. The trial world, known in galactic standard as Varnak 17, had existed as a testing ground for over 6,000 cycles. No species had conquered it without losing most of their expedition. The world itself was a brutal enigma, a shifting, semi-sentient planet riddled with neurotoxic weather systems, biomechanical predators, gravity fluctuations, and zones of temporal distortion. It was not a prison, it was worse, it was a judgment. A species that passed was catalogued as ascension-capable. Most civilizations sent their elite. Some sent machines, some never returned. And the humans, those backwater primitives from Sol 3, had sent a single man. "There has been a violation of protocol," rasped High Geneticist Varlun, his tendrils quivering with agitation. His voice echoed through the chamber, translated into hundreds of tongues by embedded psychic matrices. Trial World Varnak 17 was not to be accessed by solitary organic units. A lone human has been extracted from its surface, alive. The council murmured with tones of unease. The Ixtari blinked in synchronized waves. The Devral clicked their serrated mandibles in disbelief. Even the motionless Glycean orbships in attendance emitted pulses of ultraviolet confusion. Varlun gestured toward the center of the chamber. A hologram sprang to life, flickering, distorted, but unmistakably human. The man was wrapped in crude armor made of local chitin and root vines, slung with improvised tools. Behind him, tethered with what appeared to be vines of crystalline fiber, was a creature no species recognized, a quadrupedal beast with cobalt fur and 6 eyes. The council watched as the hologram continued. The human spoke and the translators struggled, compensating for nuance, accent, and metaphor. "They said I'd die," the human said, voice low but calm. "They didn't tell me the world was alive. It tested me. I tested it back. We came to understand each other." "Understand," Varlun scoffed, letting the word echo like an accusation. "He anthropomorphizes a Class 5 hostile environment world. Nonsense. Lies." But the human wasn't finished. In the next image, he sat beside a small, flickering fire, impossible, as ignition was thought unachievable on Varnak's constantly shifting magnetic terrain. He was telling a story, though the audio cut in and out. The few fragments caught hinted at survival, combat, and most alarmingly, a bond. The creature at his side let out a low growl, protective, alert. The human didn't flinch. From the side of the chamber, a voice spoke. It was soft, deliberate. "Perhaps we underestimated them again." It was Archivist Velari of the Cathari Compact, one of the few species who had encountered humans at close quarters during the early contact accords. Her people were known for memory inheritance, and she had inherited more memories of humanity than most. "The trial world was not meant to be beaten by one," she continued. "Yet he did not only survive, he returned with something the world gave him freely." "That speculation," Varlun snapped. Velari's translucent eyes narrowed. "It is testimony." 3 months earlier, on the edge of the Perseid abyss, Commander Elias Ron stepped from the drop pod's smoke-shrouded wreckage onto the pulsing terrain of Varnak 17. He was chosen not by the UN Stellar Command, but by something less formal and more urgent, a private vote among the veterans of Earth's off-world wars. None of them believed the science bureaucrats who claimed humanity wasn't ready. They needed someone who could disappear off the books and survive where logic failed. Ron was built like a predator but moved like a whisper. 22 years in Black Ops, 7 in the Mars Europa insurgency, 1 year presumed dead in the Sulis ice caves. When he volunteered, he told them he didn't plan to die, he planned to win. The world greeted him with madness. His first step sank ankle-deep into a carpet of bioluminescent fungi that sang low, vibrating tones directly into his nervous system. His suit's interface glitched. By the second day, it failed completely. The planet's electromagnetic fields devoured all electronics. His weapons became weights. His sensors screamed with false data. By the end of the first week, he relied only on instinct. It rained knives, rivers reversed course. Some nights the stars spun in place, caught in local temporal knots, yet Ron adapted. He used heat echoes and pressure patterns. He learned when the ground was about to twist, when the trees would whisper wrong. He watched, listened, stalked as much as he was stalked. And then came the creature. It lunged from the mist with fangs like crystal shards and a scream like breaking bone. Ron rolled, slashed, bled. The beast circled him for 3 days, never attacking again, just watching. Then it brought him a dead stalker vine, laid it at his feet, a gift. He named it Ash. They hunted together, they fought things Ron didn't have words for. They found an old ruin where glyphs changed shape when you weren't looking, and a sunken dome where dreams came alive and tried to kill you. When his arm shattered during a cave collapse, Ash stayed with him, licking the wound and growling until the fever broke. Then Ron built a fire. He didn't know why it worked, maybe he used the right minerals, maybe the planet allowed it. But it burned. It lit up the dark like a defiance, and something in the jungle screamed back. He didn't run. Instead, he told a story. He spoke to the fire, to ash, to the shadows beyond. He spoke of earth, of war, of stubbornness. He told the world who he was, and impossibly it listened. The nightmares that came each night began to slow lessen, as if the world itself was considering his words. Then the retrieval signal blinked to life. The extraction team arrived in armored exohulks, expecting to find a corpse or madness. Instead they found Ron, bearded, scarred, calm, waiting with a pet and a fire that refused to die. And now here he was, holographed across the galaxy, shaking the foundation of everything the ascendant species believed about humanity. This changes nothing, Varlun insisted. An anomaly, a fluke, we will suppress it. But others were not so sure. Velari, watching the flames flicker in the recording, whispered a phrase into her clan's memory lattice. The trial world bent to a will it did not expect. Perhaps we should all begin to expect more from Earth. The gates of the galactic archives hissed open, revealing a chamber older than the memory of most civilizations. Monoliths of encoded crystal hummed with layers of sentient data. It was here, beneath the silent watch of the immortal archivists, that Ron's arrival had sparked the second stir, this time among those who did not govern but remembered. Human designation, Elias Ron, stated the intake node, scanning him with a veil of cascading photonic light. Unranked species, unauthorized presence on trial world Varnak 17, full debrief required. Ron didn't flinch, his eyes scanned the chamber. No windows, no exits, surveillance too subtle to track. Ash sat beside him, tail twitching, its alien musculature rippling beneath cobalt fur. It growled low at the floating drones, but Ron rested a hand on its shoulder. Easy, we're guests. A voice boomed, not from a mouth, but from every wall. You speak as if you belong here. I survived your God's damned planet, Ron answered. I earned my right to speak. Across the galaxy, the council fractured. While Varlun and the conservative bloc moved to silence the anomaly, others sensed the first tremor of paradigm shift. Younger races, long held in political stasis, watched Earth's representative with fascination, not because he came with fleets or diplomacy, but because he had stepped alone into the crucible and returned with the impossible. A being of flesh and fire, a bond with a trial construct, a story that bent a world's malice. On Varnak 17, long after Ron's departure, something changed. The predators that once attacked anything moving began circling in patterns, pausing near burnt soil where Ron once sat. Storms that erased even memory now slowed over regions he had marked with blood and stone. The central AI of the observation satellite malfunctioned, replaced by images of firelight flickering endlessly in darkness. The planet itself, a synthetic terrestrial hybrid designed to test sapience under extreme psychological and environmental pressure, had never responded this way before. Not even to the Ulth, who had brought hive minds, not to the Jerikai, who had rewritten their biology to match the planet's toxic biosignature. But it had responded to him. In the data sanctum beneath Luna's shadow city of Hellion Point, Admiral Kara Solin reviewed Ron's return in silence. The private feed, routed through illegal pulse relays, was grainy and veiled in glitch, but the essence of it was clear. We sent one man, she said to her advisors. He didn't just return, he changed something. One of the advisors, a Luvian diplomat hybrid assigned to Earth's external liaison program, adjusted his cloak nervously. The Council may see this as a violation, a threat. Good, Solin said they should. She activated a tabletop projection, Ron beside the fire, Ash at his side, beyond them some presence in the trees watching and listening. We've spent decades playing the part, she continued. Backward, unready, primitive, but the galaxy just saw the truth. They test species with extinction, we test extinction with humanity. There was silence, then approval, quiet, lethal. Back in the archive, Ron endured interrogation. It wasn't cruel, but it was relentless. The archivists didn't care for politics, they cared for precedents. He was asked to recount every step, every encounter, choice, adaptation. When they showed him a simulated map of Varnak 17, it no longer matched what he remembered. Whole biomes had altered. The forest where he'd bled on jagged stone had become still, marked by low-frequency hums like chants. The cave where he'd whispered his family's names before sleep no longer reflected sound. "You changed it," whispered the lead archivist, a being with no defined form, only a field of impressions. "It rewrote itself around you." "Didn't ask it to," Ron replied. "Didn't ask for any of it. You told it a story. I didn't have much else." "Firelight is not just warmth," said the archivist. "In ancient cultures it was the seed of myth, memory burned into the eyes of darkness. Your survival is not just biological, it is cultural." Ron stood, fatigue etched in his muscles. "Are you here to learn something or just dissect it?" The archivist paused. "Both." The Council's next emergency summit took place in orbit over Alien, the crystalline gas giant whose rings were made of shattered moonworlds. This time, attendance was mandatory. From all across the galactic arms came envoys, warlords, technosages, and ascendant minds. A single human, a rogue insertion into a trial long thought beyond them, had stirred the still waters of galactic hierarchy. Varlun took the podium again. "Trial World Varnak 17 has been contaminated. The results are invalid. The human will be sequestered. Earth must be sanctioned." But Velari interrupted. "The trial world was not contaminated, it was changed, not by force, not by technology, but by something we do not understand." "Storytelling is not a survival trait," hissed a Devrol general. "Then why did it survive?" Velari replied. "Why does the trial still echo his words?" Debate surged. And in the private cryptochannels shared between observer species and subjugated worlds, a single image spread: a fire in the dark, a man beside a beast, and a world that had paused to listen. In the barracks of a forgotten world, exiled warriors of the Rathari Confederation watched the image in silence. One among them, a half-mad tactician from a lost war, spoke without turning his head. "They made fire where fire was not allowed," he said. "That's not survival, that's prophecy." Ron was no longer detained. He was relocated to observation, to analysis, but he moved freely even among the archivists. Ash remained at his side, now strangely silent when others approached, but ever alert. And one night, when the stars shimmered strange and low outside the crystal dome, Ron told another story. This time it wasn't of Earth. It was of something he felt on Varnak, something old, listening, waiting. He called it the heart of the worlds. He said it wasn't a machine, it wasn't a beast, it was a question, one the galaxy had forgotten how to answer. "But you did," the archivist said. "I didn't know the answer," Ron replied. "I just didn't lie." They watched the fire hologram again. The flames bent slightly, unnaturally, toward Ron's image. And somewhere in the reaches of unmonitored space, a second trial world, long dormant, flared to life. As if waking. As if waiting for the next story, the trial had become a signal. Long-range deep-thought observatories, scattered across the silent edges of the galaxy, began receiving strange fluctuations, irregular pulses from previously dormant trial worlds. What had once been lifeless or hostile environments created solely to measure the limits of evolution now stirred with a kind of awareness, as though memory itself had seeded into their core systems. Some ancient minds in the Council believed they were waking. Others feared they were listening. In a chamber beneath the outer Senate Tower of the Zendar Dominion, a creature of vast neural mass and crystalline sensory spines communed directly with the thought echoes of Varnak 17. Its name was Alixis. It had lived for 12 millennia, architect of the original trial codex. It had once declared humanity irrelevant, evolutionarily unstable, psychologically fragmented, unworthy of deeper study. Now it studied Ron's echo with the meticulous silence of an archivist before a sacred text. On one of its inner neural lobes, it replayed the moment again, the human sitting beside the fire, not in triumph, not in conquest, but telling a story. Words shaped by pain and warmth, uncertainty and will. Not dominance, not submission. Relation. He spoke to it, Alixis pulsed to its inner conclave, and it spoke back. "No," came a reply from the core mind. It listened. On Earth, chaos bloomed in secrecy. United Stellar Command scrambled to contain the fallout. Humanity's official channels had no knowledge of Ron's deployment, no record, no mission logs, yet his name had become a cipher spreading through the galactic underweb like wildfire, not through military channels, not through diplomatic ones. Through myths. The young species across the Orion Arm began to whisper, the man who survived Varnak. the one who came back not with weapons or trophies, but with a creature beside him and a tale no one could disprove. And worse, no one could explain. In an abandoned relay station on Ganymede, a rogue anthropologist named Dr. Sevit Korin decoded a fragment intercepted from Cathari dream speech. It translated roughly to, "The fire changed the map." When she showed it to her superiors, they dismissed it. So she published it to the Blacknet instead. Within days, microcults emerged across outposts and fringe colonies. They called themselves listeners. They didn't believe in supremacy. They didn't believe in compliance. They believed the galaxy had become sterile and that Elias Ron had rekindled its flame. On board a Glycean judgment carrier, far above the orbit of a sunless dwarf star, the council reconvened in hard light. This time, fewer seats were empty. And a new motion was tabled not by the old powers but by the fringe species. The Rivect, the Sari Collective, even rogue enclaves of the Shaldun who had once enslaved lesser races, now proposed an unprecedented act. "We demand full disclosure of all trial data," said Sari Speaker 2 of 5. "The protocols were never questioned, now they must be." Varlun burned with chemical rage. "You want to rewrite the hierarchy because a single human didn't die." "No," said Velari, stepping forward with unshakable calm, "because one lived differently." A soft ping echoed through the chamber. The Glycean superintelligence hosting the session had intercepted a signal, unauthorized, nonlinear. From Varnak 17. The world had transmitted, not telemetry, not threat. A message. A single glyph never before recorded, the stylized spiral of a campfire. And beneath it the word encoded in galactic standard, yet shaped by human syntax. "Listen." Elias Ron sat in an overgrown courtyard aboard Bastion Reach Station, a decommissioned terraforming lab now turned diplomatic way station. Around him were fragments of species too strange to meet in any other context, a whisper cluster of Nahari cloud beings, a quadrupedal synth noble from the Arkenti core, a telepathic worm priest from the Varux expanse. They didn't speak. They listened. Ron was telling the story again, but it had changed. He didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. Yet every time he told it, new details rose, insights he hadn't understood during the trial. The creature Ash didn't just bond with him, it mimicked him. It learned his rhythm. It defended the fire because it understood what it meant, not just what it did. "The world wanted to know who I was," he said, voice steady, "so I showed it." One of the Nahari murmured in neural tones. "You showed it humanity." "No," Ron replied, "I showed it choice." In a forgotten corridor of the Council's administrative databanks, a junior archivist named Drenith, a four-eyed insectoid from the outer colonies, uncovered something buried beneath thousands of cycles of silence. The original founding charter of the Trial Worlds. Its first law read simply, "A species is judged not by strength but by meaning." That line had been redacted by the Ascendant species after the first Cataclysm Wars. Too dangerous, they had said, too ambiguous. Now it was relevant again. The archivist quietly uploaded it to the interstellar public net. And the echo reached the stars. In a clandestine human outpost on the asteroid Orthonkel, Admiral Solene gathered the off-book directive. A coalition of operatives, scientists, outlaws, and philosophers dedicated to one unspoken task, pushing humanity forward before the galaxy could chain it. "We've become a myth," she told them, "and myths are more dangerous than fleets." "Do we correct it?" one agent asked. "No," Solene answered, "we build from it. The trial worlds weren't just tests, they were vaults coded to react not to conquest but to complexity." She tapped a holomap. Dozens of other trial worlds, long ignored or sealed, now pulsed with new patterns, like locks clicking open. "They're waiting for stories." "From humans," a voice asked. "From anyone who dares to be human." Back at the edge of the galaxy, where the void pressed thin and old machines drifted between starlight, something ancient stirred. A planetary consciousness network, long hidden beneath inert husks of failed civilizations, flickered online. It did not speak in words, it spoke in remembering. And it remembered the fire. The fire that had no reason to exist, the fire that burned without fuel or logic, the fire that was offered not to warm, not to conquer, but to share. And in that memory, a possibility bloomed. Not of dominance, but of reclamation. That night in a quiet dome aboard Bastion Reach, Ron lit a new fire, not holographic, not synthetic, real. It burned blue and gold, humming with particles the station's sensors couldn't explain. Ash curled beside him, and from the shadows stepped a dozen new beings, envoys, explorers, outcasts. Each carried something primitive, a token, a tale, a hope. One of them, a child of a race that had never left its moon, offered Ron a carved figure, half beast, half man. "What is it?" Ron asked gently. The creature tilted its head. "The first listener," it said, "like you." Ron stared into the fire. And somewhere across the vastness, the trial worlds waited. Not to judge, but to learn. The first ship that arrived above Trial World Zareth bore no flags, no codes of power. It was small, jury-rigged, cobbled together from scavenged tech and ancestral alloys. It came not from Earth, but from a drifting civilization once denied access to the Council's inner chambers, the Volari nomads. They were seekers, not conquerors. Their entire culture revolved around migration and memory. They had no central world, no fleet to boast of. For centuries they wandered the galactic dark, following gravitational songs and solar myths passed down through generations. But now, drawn by the signal, they came, not to conquer Zareth but to speak to it. What happened next changed the map again. The planet responded, not violently, not with storms or mental ruptures, but with shape. Forests reformed into patterns matching Volari tattoos. Mountains echoed their songs through harmonic winds. A place that once stripped identity now reflected it. The Volari called it the Mirror Right, the Council called it heresy. And across the stars, more ships began to move. On Earth, a new institute was founded beneath the ruins of the old Geneva complex. It was not military, not corporate, it was cultural. The Institute of Story-Based Phenomena. Its charter was simple: to study and train those who could do what Elias Ron had done, not survive chaos, but influence it through narrative coherence and intent. Their subjects were not soldiers. They were poets, philosophers, trauma survivors, explorers, orphans, and street performers. They were people who had bent reality without understanding how. And the data was undeniable. The trial worlds weren't reacting to species. They were reacting to frames, internal constructs, cultural cores, self-concepts transmitted into the environment through action, symbol, and persistence. Not DNA, not cybernetics. Meaning, in the quorum of stellar sovereigns, the fractures deepened. The ascendant powers were losing control of the narrative. New species demanded access to the trials. Old ones wanted their results re-evaluated. The Devrul and Yixtari threatened war, declaring the sudden shift a threat to galactic equilibrium. But the idea had already seeded too deep. Trial World Kilos 9, once considered a death planet, reshaped its gravity field into a navigable spiral path when a trio of blind ENR singers entered orbit and began reciting generational songs. Trial World Vorka melted its acidic crust for the first time in 18,000 cycles when a solitary child from the dust moons of Karth lay down and painted a mural using nothing but her own blood and crushed crystal from her shipwreck. The worlds were listening. They always had been. It was the galaxy that had gone deaf. Ron refused to return to Earth. He wandered instead, not as a hero, not as an icon, but as a kind of living signal. Wherever he went, fires were lit. Not real fires, though sometimes those too, but moments of ignition, of clarity, of human connection passed through cultures like gravitational tremors. He met a Corali dream merchant who had begun teaching her people how to shape memory with narrative anchors, a phrase Ron didn't understand but felt in his bones. He sat with a former assassin from the Ninefold Shardkin, who had found peace only after recreating the exact story Ron had told beside the Varnak fire, using ritual shadow play. He watched a synthetic intelligence, long exiled from its makers, replicate Ash's image into 1,000 different symbols, each evolving, fractalized, scattered across refugee fleets like a protective totem. Ron said little in those days. He didn't need to. The story spoke louder than he ever could. Far from the politics, in the abyss between star systems, a secret alliance began to form. They called themselves the Rekindlers. Drawn from dozens of species, some still unrecognized, some long forgotten, they didn't meet in person. They met in memory, in encrypted dreams, in stories cross-loaded into unstable quantum caches. Their goal wasn't rebellion. It was renewal. The Rekindlers believed the trial worlds were part of something older, a pre-council system, a framework left behind by whoever had built the first sentient systems long before memory could track them. These worlds weren't just challenges, they were mirrors. And humanity, by accident or by essence, had remembered how to look into them. One rekindler, a former high seer of the shattered Dramathi houses, summarized it best in a fragment that rippled across every hidden channel. They made fire in the dark, not to burn, not to destroy, but to say, "I am here and I see you," the trial responded, because it too had been waiting to be seen. In a deep chamber beneath the council's primary archive citadel, Alexis faced something it hadn't acknowledged in millennia. Fear, not of war, of change. The ascendant species had used the trials to maintain order, to limit chaos, to determine worth through measurable suffering and endurance. But Ron had passed through the same crucible not by resisting it, but by engaging it. By responding with something that had no metric. And now the framework was destabilizing. New species refused the Council's authority. They invoked the story instead, not as rebellion but as precedent, a declaration of shared potential. A declaration of presence. Alexis reached out into the subspace strata where the old codes lay buried, and there, pulsing faintly beneath quantum sand, it found the original builder's signature. An encoded phrase. "Let those who remember meaning remake the stars." Alexis shut down the archive's access. Too late. The code had already been duplicated. At the farthest edge of known space, where council maps ended and myth began, something impossibly old stirred. It was not a world. It was a womb. Constructed before language, before gravity was stable, before even time was fixed. It had waited. And now, from the many pulses of trial echoes, it heard something new. Not order, not conquest, not unity. Story. The story of one man. One fire. One companion who wasn't tamed but chose to stay. And the ancient womb did what it had not done in eons. It opened. The final trial had begun. But this time it had no test. Only a question. What are you becoming? And from a million systems away, the answer was already forming. Not in command. Not in armies. But in voices. Telling stories beside fires that were never meant to burn. The sky over the last trial bloomed with impossible color. It was not a planet, not in any conventional sense. It occupied space but defied orbit. Its core pulsed with chronogenic rhythms that disobeyed causality, and its outer layers were not soil or stone but condensed experience, memory solidified, dream flesh hardened into terrain. No map could define it, no fleet could approach without unraveling. It had no name in any known language. Until now, it had waded beyond the veil of perception, encoded into the myths of 100 species as a lost god, a forbidden gate, a riddle that punished those who asked. And now it had awakened. Because a human had told a story beside a fire. The council no longer met in unity. Its great chamber had fractured ideologically, politically, even physically. Varlun's voice no longer commanded silence. The Devrol fleets, once poised to suppress rebellion, had turned inward, their command systems infected with recursive glyphs traced back to the trial signals. The Cathari Compact withdrew from the accord entirely, declaring a new era of narrative-based diplomacy. And in the absence of centralized control, the rekindlers moved. They had mapped the fire lines, emotional trajectories traced from every world that had responded to narrative resonance. Not merely trial worlds now, but core systems, dead moons, machine intelligences. Everywhere the story had spread, structure shifted. Starships stopped using conventional navigation. They began traveling along meaning arcs, curved routes defined by cultural resonance and internal symmetry. Quantum tunneling became easier when a destination felt earned. Even time distortion fields adapted, flowing slower or faster not by gravity, but by narrative tension. And across it all moved the signal of the last trial. A pulse without coordinates, a place that could only be reached through understanding. Ilias Ron didn't decide to go. He simply found himself there. No ship carried him, no door opened. One moment he was speaking to a broken AI child on the desert moons of Tekun, listening to her hum the tune of her dying kin, and the next he stood in a clearing of impossible silence. Ash was with him as always. The ground was soft and starlit, trees whispered not in wind but in memory. Above, the sky had no stars, only fragments of lives not yet lived. Ron took one breath, then another. "I'm listening," he said. The trial responded. But not as Varnak had with violence and threat, not as the others with reflection and distortion. The last trial spoke with presence. Shapes rose from the ground, not enemies, not tests, but echoes. His mother singing by candlelight. His commanding officer on Mars whispering the names of the dead. The first child he had ever pulled from rubble during the off-world war. Then a figure made of starlight and ash crouched beside him, his mirror, his unmade self. The Ron who had not survived Varnak, the one who broke, who lay down in the dark and closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He simply stared. And then the fire sparked between them. Not wood, not fuel. Just connection. Recognition. And slowly, gently, the trial showed him what it had become. A world of stories, a place that would no longer test for dominance or logic, a sanctuary not for the strong but for the meaningful. The trial worlds had evolved, or perhaps they had always been waiting to remember what they were for. And now they were waking across the galaxy. To reshape it. The effect was immediate. On planets across the Orion Arm, conflict paused. Armies halted mid-march, unmoved by orders, eyes turned to the sky as dreams not their own played across the clouds. A commander of the Shaldun Cleansing Legion dropped her blade when her daughter's voice, lost in a transport collapse years ago, whispered, "I forgive you," from the mouth of a trial echo. A pirate queen on the fringes of the Velra Maw witnessed her father's last story, relived by a trial fragment in perfect detail, and wept for the first time since her exile. A clone being in the submerged domes of Linzai, never granted a name, saw a vision of itself standing among stars, free, individual, singing, and chose to speak its first word. And from these small moments, great ones rippled. Because change no longer came from power. It came from fire. In the remnants of the council chamber, Velari of the Cathari stood before the last quorum. Her voice was clear. The galaxy has shifted, not from war, not from force, but from story, and if we do not accept this, we will be relics. She looked at the broken spires, the fractured seats of power. Let the old tests end, let the trials become what they were meant to be, not crucibles, but mirrors. Let the stars remember meaning again. And they did not vote. They simply listened. The final act came not with fanfare, but with understanding. Elias Ron stood in the center of the last trial, surrounded now by others. Not soldiers. Not leaders. Just people. From every edge of the galaxy. Each had reached the place not by force, but by resonance. Each had passed a trial not by defeating it, but by revealing themselves to it. Together they lit the final fire. It blazed higher than the dome of the world. And from that fire across all space, a new kind of signal was born. Not binary, not electromagnetic. A narrative pulse, an echo of identity sent from heart to heart, culture to culture, being to being. It seeded new civilizations. It healed old wounds. And it began to teach the stars how to dream again. Ash held once long low proud. Ron smiled, not because he had changed the galaxy, but because at last the galaxy had remembered how to change itself. One story at a time,